Jews or Hebrews to the world culture. Every other society has, having heard it, adopted it, but they didn't adopt it before they heard it from the Hebrews. It didn't exist. And there's no place that you can point to that it did exist. And the Hebrews thought it was so basic, they built it into the very structure of the creation story. You see, God, just like we rest, God rests. And now, of course, 7 days is enough for us. We want 2 days of rest. We want the weekend. And in Europe, they want 3 days of rest, you know, and so on and so forth, etc. And les vacances as well. But before the Hebrews got this thing moving, there was no such thing as a day of rest set aside. And a Sabbath, as it was called, that your ancestors thought was very important back in England and other places where they may have come from. So that really is something that you cannot gainsay, is a contribution that the Hebrews made, or the Jews, to world culture. And they built it into this creation, first book of the Bible. They made the whole creation reflect that view of the universe. Now, I think that's an artistic decision. I think that that's something the way they wanted to present it. I don't necessarily, and I think the priestly idea that this is priestly isn't a bad way of putting it. That the festivals and so on, since the priests were interested in keeping festivals and things, that was part of their interest to keep the view of the world that they wanted. They built it in the creation. So this was never supposed to be a scientific story, picture. You know, it shouldn't be competing with Darwinianism. It's a different type of story or presentation. And those people who want to say, oh, this Darwin contradicts the Bible. I mean, it's just totally absurd to argue those points, because this is a religious, ceremonial, moral presentation where the Sabbath is built into the structure. That doesn't mean that these people really thought the world was created in 7 days. That's the way they chose to present it in order to sanctify the Sabbath. I don't think anybody back in I think those people back then were smarter than people now. I don't think people in 1500 BC thought, oh, well, this is the absolute truth, necessarily. And the people who wrote this, they wrote it because they wanted the Sabbath and the structure of the way people's lives was to be reflected in the creation of the whole universe, and vice versa. So I think that was purposefully done, and I think we're all beneficiaries of it. Okay, let's go on a little more before we leave, because I wasted some time with that introduction today. Anyway, so now we get into this second story. Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden, not line 8, which is in the east, and there he put the man he fashioned. Now here, you know, it's not a multiple creation. It's like a sculptor. It is really fashioned. It's like what a sculptor does, and he makes it out of clay, like a little sort of Greek god situation scenario here. And God is like molding it, and then he takes it and puts him down in there. It's a totally different picture of the universe and of the way God functions in it. And God's like it's more anthropomorphized. God plants things, plants a tree here. And he also walks around in this universe. You know, God is walking through the, you know, he's a man almost. Anyway, quickly. So a river flowed from Eden, we don't even know where that is, to water the garden. And by the way, there's no goodness yet either. Yahweh God caused to spring up from the soil every kind of tree, enticing to look at it and good to eat, with the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden. But he forbade man to eat those trees, supposedly. So man didn't have knowledge of good and evil at this point, supposedly. And line 16, we'll come back to this. He gives man this admonition: you may eat indeed all the trees in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you are not to eat. For on the day you eat it, you will surely die, or know death if you want. Of course, the point of the story is man does eat the forbidden fruit, Eve contributing to the process, and that day man becomes mortal and will die and will not be like the gods and so on. But we'll get to that next time. At the moment, we should break off there and let you guys go home. Thanks a lot for the evening. See you next time. What's your assignment? Keep reading. You can see how fast I'm going, so you can either go faster or slower depending on what you feel your schedule